Just beginning, of course, on what we heard last hour, a positive test for a protester at the Melbourne Black Lives Matter rally over the weekend. Your Senator Janet Rice was there. She's previously said she won't get tested. Should she now?
Well, I hope that person's okay, and I understand from some reports that they've said that they socially distanced themselves at the rally, and I hope that's the case. We've been listening to what the Deputy Chief Medical Officer in particular has been saying about this and about parliamentarians who attend, and he's been making the point that just because someone attended the rally isn't a reason in and of itself to get tested, especially given that Janet and Maureen Faruqi, who attended the rallies, practiced social distancing whilst they were there. We're reaching out to see whether the Deputy Chief Medical Officer's advice has changed, but certainly the advice from the health experts and the health experts that the government has been relying on at the moment is that it isn't necessary for people to get tested simply because they were at a gathering, because as has been mentioned, it was very large and people were practicing social distancing.
So, but if that you've reached out again, just to clarify that position after this development, and if the situation is, well, there might be a case to, you know, in an abundance of caution to get the test, that will happen.
Well, we've followed the medical advice, and they've said that, look, it's with respect to testing, and the mere presence at a rally isn't in and of itself a sufficient reason to get tested, especially if you're not showing any symptoms. And so we'll reach out and see if that's still their advice, because we've argued all the way through for a health-led approach to social distancing restrictions in response to the coronavirus, and that'll continue to be the case.
You've mentioned following health advice, of course. The other health advice from all of the medical officers, state and federal, was to not attend the rallies. Why wasn't that advice followed?
Well, I think people, because this is a very important issue, and what is being brought onto the streets of Australia, as we're seeing around the world, is a real a plea for Australia to take seriously the issue of black deaths in custody. And we have had 437 people die in custody since the Royal Commission's recommendations. The government is meant to be leading a push to bring that number down, and it is not working. And people are demanding better, and they are entitled to demand better. And provided that people who attend rallies and when they go to those protests practice the appropriate social distancing measures, then I think that's appropriate. And look, let's remember that I know the Prime Minister is out at the moment trying to do everything he possibly can to distract attention from his failures when it comes to deaths in custody. But let's remember that, you know, when people went to a 5G protest on the streets of Melbourne, he was saying it's a free country, and he wasn't out there calling for people to be charged when that happened. I mean, it's utter hypocrisy. And now he's out there saying states need to lift their borders and there needs to be greater movement. And this is the man who, when infection rates were at their highest, wanted to go to the football and was telling everyone to go to the football. So come on, give me a break. The Prime Minister can't have it both ways on this and say everyone needs to start mingling more, when at the same time, when people listen to the medical advice and practice social distancing and then decide about whether to get tested or not in accordance with that medical advice, that to me is appropriate.
But I mean, I've seen some of the pictures from the COVID, from the 5G, you know, they tried to link it to COVID protests. Clearly they weren't able to have social distancing. That was the same warning for these protests. You can't have tens of thousands of people in Melbourne and practice social distancing. That's why the advice from our health authorities was not to go. Why should that be ignored?
Well, again, the Prime Minister is trying to make a political point out of this, and he's the one who said
I'm
it's
not
a free
asking
country.
About the Prime Minister.
And people in Melbourne,
I'm asking about the authority from health officials.
Yeah, well, people in Melbourne who attended the protests, certainly the ones that I've spoken to, did it because they are very, very concerned about what is happening here in Australia, about what is happening around the world. It's not, as the Prime Minister said, some protest that's been hijacked. This is people that these are protests that are being led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are drawing attention to the number of people who are dying in custody and the need for the federal government to show some leadership so that we stop Aboriginal people dying in custody. And the government doesn't want to respond to that. The government is not talking about that. Now, certainly the people that I spoke to who attended that rally practiced social distancing. And look, people are going out to
But you can see the pictures. You say people you've spoken to at the rally, practice social distancing. We've seen the vision. Clearly not everybody did. Clearly huge reams of people were very close, much closer than 1.5 metres. We're talking about thousands of people. That's self-evident, isn't it?
But lots of people did practice social distancing because they know that they want to make sure that we have a health first response to this crisis and that we don't contribute to the spread of the crisis. But that shouldn't come at the cost of drawing attention to the number of Aboriginal people who are dying in custody. And so people, certainly the people that I've spoken to, behaved responsibly, just as they would when you go to the supermarket, just as people walking down the street, as greater numbers of people now. As the restrictions start to get eased, people are going out. People are, as you walk down the street, people pass each other. Now, you're reliant on everyone exercising their good judgment to ensure that they keep at a distance from each other. There are risks as we go outside and start to ease restrictions, and that's what certainly people, including Senator Janet Rice, did when going to the rally. So I think it's perfectly appropriate.
Did the senators that go to the rallies have the COVID Safe app downloaded and working?
I don't know. You'd have to ask them.
Should they have?
Well, look, I've got it, and we've made it clear that I think there's a personal choice, and some people have wanted to download the app, and others have the very legitimate concern about the government's utter failure to protect people's privacy and their unwillingness to put in safeguards before people have been downloading the app. And I notice the government's gone very quiet about the app now, and we've always been suspicious about whether it was the silver bullet that the government said it would. But look, we didn't stand in the way of the legislation. I've got the app downloaded, but at the end of the day, I think it's a personal decision for people to make, and I respect the decisions that they make either way.
We've had a weekend, obviously, of protests. The issue broadly of Black Lives Matter, specifically to Australia, of Indigenous incarceration, deaths in custody, are all out there and being spoken about now. What's your advice to people thinking of going to a rally again this weekend? Health authorities saying, please don't, and we have had a positive test now from one of the protests.
If the government doesn't want people to attend protests, then it should start doing something about the number of black people who are dying in custody. Like, that is the real issue that Scott Morrison is trying desperately to avoid. There's a National Cabinet meeting this Friday. So you ask what my advice be? My advice would be for Scott Morrison to put on the agenda of the National Cabinet this Friday a timetable to drive change, to get the states to change their laws to stop the incarceration of so many Aboriginal Australians in this country.
If that's an agenda item, then would that be enough to say, don't protest, we're getting movement here? Because we can't fix this before Saturday.
An agenda item. It should be an agenda item with a timetable that comes out of it that requires the states to take action, and it should be a standing agenda item at every national cabinet from here on in. Look, the big problem, what we know, is that in some states, in some areas, you've got the Aboriginal people being up to a third of the prison population in some areas. Now, that is the biggest contributor to why people are dying in custody. And to get that change, the states need to change their criminal laws, including with respect to the age of criminal responsibility, but including mandatory sentencing, which is seeing so many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people being locked up and then being put in dangerous situations. So if the Prime Minister is really serious, there's things that he can do. And if he doesn't want people marching because he says that it's a risk, then get out there and do something to stop black people dying in custody.
We've got 30 seconds left. The PM also saying, because of COVID restrictions right now, if people are protesting against the law, there should be charges. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, the Prime Minister's response is everything that is wrong with a discussion about race in this country. The Prime Minister is in denial about racism. The Prime Minister does not understand Australian history. He is trying to whitewash Australian history and sweep important issues like slavery under the carpet and tell a false version of what has led Australia to this point. And it's Prime Minister's comments like that that are going to lead to more people attending these rallies.